That goes to show how much they're controlling the U.S. Congress. And total, I mean, it's unbelievable, unlimited campaign contribution. You know, in the year 2000, when John McCain was running against George W. Bush, he would have been the most viable candidate if you were a Republican to vote for him, because he was talking about campaign contribution legislation, reforming it. Of course, he had to get defeated by the Bush mafia. In 2008, different story. He brought on Sarah, whatever her name was, Sarah Palin, turned off so many people because he was 1 foot in the grave himself, and Sarah Palin was going to take over, and not job worse than George W. Bush. So, but he was talking the right talk. If we had campaign contribution reform at that election, that would have cleaned up Washington significantly. I'm positive that AIPAC was running against John McCain to defeat that, so these congressmen and senators wouldn't be getting hundreds of millions of dollars throughout the years to be the voice of a foreign entity. And while I'm on that topic, JFK, not his brother, JFK, there was a Zionist hand in assassinating him. Most people don't understand. JFK was against nuclear proliferation. Ben Gurion, the father of modern Israel, resigned as a result of the dispute with JFK. He resigned because JFK's policy was Israel should not have a nuclear weapon under any circumstances. It was the French who came in and gave him the technology to build the reactors that they have in southern Israel. So they had a hand in assassinating JFK. This is not me saying it. This is top intelligence people, senior aides to JFK at that time, who are passing away. They're in their elderly, coming out and saying this. Jack Rubin, which we all know, the guy who assassinated Oswald, his real name is Jack Rubenstein. And we were told, he was just some nightclub owner in Dallas. No, he worked for Mossad. He took out the pansy Oswald in order to cover up the whole thing. So, I mean, these things are not in the realm of conspiracy theories. I'm an academic. I'm interested in conspiracy facts, not conspiracy theories. This was a conspiracy fact. So they go as far as having a hand. They were not the only group, but having a hand in assassinating a U.S. president. Regardless of how you think of JFK, he had a lot of good ideas, and he prevented a nuclear war between us and the Soviet Union over the Cuban Missile Crisis. These are conspiracy facts. October 7th is a conspiracy fact. 9/11 is a conspiracy fact. These are not conspiracy theories. Serious academics have come out and proved the fact that these were conspiracy facts. The fact that the intrusion into Israel, southern Israel, by Hamas terrorists was accidental and it was a security failure, this is laughed at in Israel. It's an open secret that these people were unleashed thanks to Netanyahu, who wanted that war, who was lusting that war in order to remain in power. Why would you move a bunch of party-going, drug-taking, rave partiers in southern Israel, in the desert, move them closer to the Gaza-Israel, we cannot call it border, because Gaza is not recognized as a country. They keep calling it border in the mainstream media. The fence. Why would you move them closer to the fence? Unless you want them to be murdered, unless you want the people of your own country to be murdered as a justification, as a pretext to start a war. I mean, this was so obvious. If you know the truth, when you come across these stories and Biden going and bear hugging Netanyahu and vice versa, and Netanyahu trying to invoke 9/11 using PSYOP, NLP. NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming Techniques, to equivocate 10/7 with 9/11. It was so obvious to us that we saw right through it. Max Blumenthal and Chris Hedge have done some fantastic scholarly, investigative, journalistic work on this. And this is an open secret. Haaretz, you get more truth about Israel from Israeli publications than any collective Western media about what's really going on in Israel. And I highly recommend people to check Haaretz on a daily basis. It's in English. You get more truth about Israeli domestic situation, politics, and economics than you would get from any CNN or Fox News or the rest of them. They're all the same. BBC, France 24, Deutsche Welle, all these 24/7 English language news agencies in the West, collective West. You get more truth about Israel reading Haaretz and maybe Jerusalem Post, although I don't read that one, than you would get from our media, because our media is very much influenced by I don't want to use the word Jewish lobby, but the Zionist lobby. They are extremely OCD, obsessive compulsively disordered when it comes to phrases and the way they shape the narrative and people's image about Israel. Netanyahu, most people don't understand, he was invited on many news channel shows like you wouldn't believe. He was an agent of that. He's a media guy. He knows how to manipulate the American public opinion, and he was on record, actually boasting about that when he was visiting the family of an Israeli family whose loved ones were killed in a Palestinian terrorist attack. In Hebrew, he says that don't worry about the American people. I know how to manipulate them. I know how to take care of them. I know how to have influence over them. This is on YouTube. So they're not hiding it. They're so arrogant. And let me quote a phrase from the Old Testament. I think it's the book of Proverbs, chapter 26. And I'm not a Bible thumper or religious person, but it's really interesting. This passage just jumped out to me. It said, arrogance comes before destruction. I don't believe in the destruction of Israel. I don't believe in the destruction of any country. I do believe in the liberation of a people and the destruction of ideologies. Zionist ideology should be on its way out. It has gone beyond its shelf life, right? So the arrogance of Netanyahu and the Likud party, again, we have to be careful. They're not all the same. The arrogance of the ultra-conservative Likud party and the religious nuts, the party of all the coalition of religious nuts, these people's arrogance comes before their destruction. I don't believe in physical destruction, but I believe in the destruction of the Zionist ideology, which is humanitarian, it's anti-Palestinian, and it's a supremacist way of thinking. Zionism and Nazism are not far apart. People will say, how could that be? Nazism was anti-Jewish. Zionism is very much anti what I call rural Jews. You got the cosmopolitan Jews and you got the rural Jews. They're very much against rural Jews. Therefore, they are the biggest anti-Semitic group. And we have sons of Israeli generals coming in and say one of the biggest terrorist groups in the world is the IDF. Hamas are terrorists. Absolutely, they're terrorists. Harming civilians for political causes, that is the definition of terrorism. But that's exactly what Israel is doing in Gaza, and they have the audacity to call themselves the most moral army on earth. Who actually buys that? I think Netanyahu is the most evil Jewish person who has ever lived. He has permanently tarnished the Jewish reputation of Jews in the past, present, and future. That's how damaging this person has been to true Judaism. We need to absolutely mention that.
Okay. Nuri Jun, I had to close your microphone. You had the noise coming. You and Aishwarya, if you have any questions, please ask, or then we move to the next topic.
I think he covered a lot in that topic and just went over nearly everything, to be fair. Yeah, so we'll move to the next topic, sure.
Okay.
Right. Right. Let's move to the next topic. I like his analysis and deep knowledge of details. Thanks, Dr. John.
Yeah, and you can read his articles. They're great.
Whoa. Yeah.
Okay, we covered Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. There is the Iranian elections. I have to switch back. And then I also want to talk about Bernie Sanders. I read your article about Bernie Sanders, fake hero of a lot of youth.
You know, Ellie, in politics, everything is relative. I come from academia, so there's a sense of idealism about my work. But my other side, my political side, you have to be very practical. Getting something is better than getting nothing, even from Bernie, even from Chuck Schumer, who openly condemned Netanyahu and asked him to, you need to leave power. That was something. Now, Chuck Schumer happens to be one of the biggest Zionists, right? The biggest supporter of the Zionist cause.
800 million aid
Yeah.
to go to him.
Yeah, they do that. But the fact that for the first time in our Congress, the unchallenged military support for Israel is being actually challenged is a good start. Whether Bernie does it or even crazy people like AOC. Some issues I agree with her, other issues I totally disagree with her. As a balanced academic. Bernie Sanders is a very complicated character. It's better having him than not having him, even though he's voted for so many wars. Not having him would be more disadvantageous, excuse me. Not having him would be more disadvantageous than having him. We got to look at these things relatively. Of course, we want to be idealistic. Of course, we want to have real change, but we got to work with what we got and sort of build from there. If there is such a thing as grassroots pressure, I don't think that, I don't want to believe that it doesn't exist. I still want to believe it does exist, but it's the lobbies that are basically pushing all the agendas. We should never give up on grassroots activism. Never, ever. What you're doing is grassroots activism, and we'll continue to do that. But we got to be realistic about that.
Code Pink, Jill Stein. They're
Yes.
all with activism.
Code Pink.
Not let the Code Pink Medea Benjamin into his office.
Yeah.
He's done.
Code Pink is doing a lot of good work, and it's a bunch of not young people. The thing that upsets me, other than the protest, the peace protest, shall we say, of these wonderful students all across U.S. campuses, that gives me hope that the youth are involved. That gives me hope. But on other issues, you see, I haven't seen young people in Code Pink, and that's a very effective organization, completely peaceful, very rational, logical, approaching corrupt politicians and challenging them and recording it. That is the way to do it, not writing letters to Congress. You got to have that camera out there. The resolutions are so good in these cameras, and the battery life is so good on these new cameras that you got to record them, catch them in the middle of their act, and show them how vile and warmongering these congressmen and senators are, and post it. That's truth. That's reality. They're exposing themselves. They're so arrogant. Soon I will write an article. I'm being muzzled right now, so it's a little difficult for me. Soon I will write an article questioning the entire evangelical thesis of supporting Israel. Going back to this creepy character in the 19th century called John Nelson Darby. It's called Darbyism. That's the whole Israelism, end-time events, dispensationalism. That's how it all started. You challenge that original narrative as well as the post-Reformation ideologies of the late 1600s, around 1580. That's how Israelism and Zionism got its start. We got to go right into that and convince our evangelical friends about how wrong side of the history they are on. So I'm in the midst of writing that expose article and bringing that into awareness and making it short so people can follow. I write analytical pieces that are several pages, and every 6 months I do that because these things take a lot of time. But I want to start writing short pieces and exposing the ideological roots of Christian Zionism, by the way. Christian supremacist Zionism, which has done more to damage Judaism than Jewish Zionism. People need to know the majority of Zionists, numerically speaking, are these lunatic evangelicals. I don't even want to call them Christians. They're evangelical supremacists. People like John Hagee with his Cornerstone Church in Texas called Cornerstone Church. They actually fly the Israeli flag. And people are, when they get up and do whatever heck they do, these crazy evangelicals, they wave the Israeli flag. This organization, he has created a lobby group called KUFI, Christians United for Israel. Extremely destructive. You challenge their John Nelson Darbyist ideology, a lot of these people are going to leave. These were the most uneducated people in the 19th century who became Bible scholars. Cyrus Cofield is another of them. They actually created a Cofield Bible with commentary. They're completely uneducated in theology, who came up with their own, ideologies, and Israelism was created. And that's why these evangelicals their last stance is like, we gotta have Israel. In their idiotic mindset is the third temple, and this is these evangelical supremacists, so-called Christians, are the biggest anti-Semites because they say the third temple has to be built for the Antichrist to come, who's going to be Jewish according to them. Therefore, the real Jesus will come back again and destroy the majority of Jews who will not believe in Jesus. I mean, this crazy genocidal religious lunacy that the evangelicals are supporting as a reason for Israel to exist. They go back to the book of Jeremiah and say Israel must exist, otherwise Christ will not return. I mean, it's complete idiotic when you abuse God into geopolitics and don't know what the hell you're talking about when it does come to God and theology and Old Testament and New Testament eschatological writings. This has found its way into foreign policy. That's why I'm mentioning this. They can sit around and theorize about the second coming of Jesus or whoever else, whatever. When those ideologies find their way into geopolitics and actual policy making at Brussels and in Washington, then we need to expose their eschatological narratives to realize how corrosive they are being for their blind support of Israel, that Israel must exist and that God brought Israel together. Very interesting. So Rothschilds are the gods, huh? Israel was, I mean, that's idiotic. On one hand, these evangelicals are so against Rothschilds, but on the other hand, the Rothschilds were used by God to create the state of Israel. Oh, really? So God used Hitler for the genocide of 6 million Jews. What kind of God are we talking about here? I rebuke that God. That God is nothing but Satan. To sacrifice 6 million people because Hitler uses God? I mean, or God uses Hitler? This mentality's got to go. It needs to be exposed. That is a desert understanding of an Iron Age desert God who wasn't really the true God to begin with. That was a reflection of these lost people wandering around in desert for 40 years, concocting these theories and these notions of a creator who happens to be also a destroyer. It is just so idiotic and so irrational that you go to any church and you can't even say anything critical of Israel. And so these things need to be talked about because they found their creepy way into the realm of geopolitics, and that's why I'm mentioning it. I'm sorry, these issues are all interrelated. I'm not jumping from one branch to another talking about these things. I think I think it was Einstein who said, if you can't explain it in simple terms for simple people, then you haven't done your job. So I'm trying to not simplify things. I'm trying to shed light on very complicated matter. And if people can follow the fast pace of what I'm talking about, then they start putting the puzzle together. And that's what I'm trying to do. These things are interrelated to the intricacies between the global north and the global south. You mentioned the Iranian election or the Indian election. You got right-wing populist movements popping up left and right, whether it's Argentina or here in the US or in Russia, or in the case of Philippines, we had President Duterte who was doing some good work. In Hungary, we got President Orban. In Poland, we had President Duda, right? I'm not agreeing with these people, but they're challenging the neo-globalist, it's the neoliberal globalist thesis, right? So they're doing some good work too, and there's some terrible things that they're doing as well. That lunatic down in Brazil, his name doesn't come to my mind. He got replaced by President Lula, Bolsonaro, right?
Yeah.
Right-wing populism that is addressing some issues that the new liberalist globalists are suppressing because there's this agenda of bringing the world together. Oh, really? You mean bringing all the capitalists and the creeps and the child molesters together under one umbrella and have them come up with their own version of a new world? Bringing people like Bill Gates, bringing George Soros, to the point where, globalization got a bad name. You got to understand, you have to distinguish between globalism and globalization. Globalization we've had forever, since the advent of the Silk Road from China to Europe, and from there to actually Africa, from China to even Africa. There's nothing wrong with globalization. Globalization is what has saved the world, especially during the past 80 years. But globalism is an evil, immoral, suppressionist mentality. at the hands of the elite who think they know the best for us, and none of them are, by the way, democratically elected. Last time I checked, Bill Gates wasn't democratically elected. How dare these people get to make decisions that would impact billions of people, whether it's in geopolitics or agriculture or AI or any of these other issues. So we have to distinguish between these two phenomenons. The one thing I want to say that's very important, because we are realists. In my line of business, we are not pacifists, or we are not, we don't even like to call ourselves peace activists, although it's wonderful to be a peace activist. But you have to understand that the organizing principle of any society is for war. The basic authority of a modern nation state, since the advent of the Treaty of Westphalia in the year 1648 in Germany, was over its people. That kind of authority of a nation state over its people resides in its war powers. War readiness accounts for approximately 10% of the output of the world total economy. I didn't say war, I said war readiness. God forbid when it goes to the actual war, then we're talking much more than 10% of the output of the global economy. History is shaped by how information is managed and made available to the masses. That's why you're doing what you're doing. I'm doing what I'm doing in global media. That's how history is actually shaped. We need to know that, because people are finally realizing that wasted trillions of dollars in all these wars, in these horrible money laundering wars around the world, could provide them with all sorts of social services, here at home especially. I mentioned the word $95 billion aid package. I like to call it $95 billion destabilization package. Imagine Medicare for all. I mean, criticizing Bernie Sanders. Medicare for all is a wonderful thing. Talk to the elderly in this country. They would attest to it. It's a wonderful thing. We actually can totally afford it. And that's why Trumpism and some of these populist right-wing movements are actually right when they say we gotta disengage from the world at the level we're at, not entirely become isolationist, and invest in our own infrastructure. China, not too long ago, I think the project ended in 2019, right before COVID, completed the longest railway system for 1,848 kilometers, transporting coal from Inner Mongolia to southern China. And a big chunk of these trains that go over this rail track are above ground. It is incredible the amount of money they're investing in their own infrastructure, while we are so incompetent that a cargo ship hits the bridge in the port of Baltimore. And all these other infrastructure sort of coming apart. People are seeing this, and they're saying the hell with Genocide Joe and his expansionist policies in Ukraine, poking Russia, or the way they're supporting Israel. Now his rhetoric is changing. He's saying the right things, but it's too late. In action, we're talking at least in this so-called aid package, $26 billion going to Israel. Now, under the David Accord, Camp David Accord, which was signed by President Sadat and Menachem Begin and President Carter, it was agreed that every year we would give $3 billion to Egypt and $3 billion to Israel. Peace is made in such ways, they claimed, right? And we've had peace between Egypt and Israel. These countries.
Trump? What was
No,
role
it
of
was.
Trump?
No, well, you're talking about the Abraham Accord. I'm talking about Camp David. Abraham Accord was Trump's idea in isolating Iran. That's what that was all about, right? And Netanyahu actually talked about that in his last speech at the UNGA, UN General Assembly, which happens every September. World leaders come to New York. He actually presented a map showing the products coming from India into Dubai and Oman and Dubai, and from there going to Israel. And they call it the new map of the Middle East. It was laughable, like so many other things that he does. We saw how that worked, right? So we've been giving Israel and Egypt $3 billion a year in order to preserve the peace between these two nations since President Carter's so-called peace accord. So to take away the incentive for war. So in sometimes that works, except that off record, We've been sending a whole much more, many $billions more to Israel that we've been giving to Egypt. And now what's happening? Egypt has been ruled by corrupt dictators for all these decades, or let's just call them corrupt leaders, if you may, dictatorship leaders, practically all connected to Egyptian army, and they're bankrupt, totally bankrupt. Part of this, the end game with the Israelis is to shove these poor Palestinians from Rafah, northern Gaza has been completely eradicated, shove them into Sinai Peninsula, and for the Israelis, through their clout and influence on global finance, pay Egypt's debt. Once again, we're going to have another peace accord between Israelis and Egyptians at the expense of these poor, destitute Palestinians whom everybody uses for their own geopolitical ends and means. That's their end game. And that's why everybody knows that. The Qataris know that, Iranians know that, ICC knows that, ICJ knows that, and they're going to say absolutely not. We're going to find different ways to pay Egyptian debts so they would help, or not pay their debt at all. The hell with them. Let them figure it out by themselves. Let's not use the Palestinians as a pawn, as a negotiation point into making sure Israel gets what they want. And everybody, Jordanians have closed their borders, Egyptians has closed their borders. I always say, rich oil Arab dictatorships are the biggest enemy to the Palestinians and Israel. Believe it or not. Believe it or not. They close their borders all these years since Nikba, since 1948. Nikba, it means disaster. That's what it means. In Persian, it's nikbat, with the end in the T. It means disaster. Since 1948 that this country was created, legitimately through UN, you have to be very fair with that, none of the Arab countries allowed the Palestinian migrants into these countries to become citizens of those countries all these years. So they could use them as a pawn later on with Israel to negotiate. The only country that took him in, Jordan, the huge part of 40% or 45% of the Jordanian population are Palestinian immigrants from Palestine after Nikba, after 1948. And so in that sense, the Jordanians had to do it for their own national security reasons and for social cohesion. But the rest of the Arab countries continue to betray the Palestinians. They're not doing anything but talking, and this is a humanitarian disaster compared to Yemen, the Yemeni crisis from 2013 up to now. And they're not doing anything. All they do is talk, and all they do is use Palestine, as an item to get what they want out of Israel and U.S. and Europe. So we have to be very fair and balanced with that. Going back to what I was saying about Israel, Israel was created legitimately through usurping, well, if it's usurping, it's not legitimate, but they were created vis-a-vis the UN mandate and function. So I don't believe necessarily in the chant death to Israel, because that goes against international norms, values, and beliefs. I have no problem saying death to a certain ideology, death to Zionism, death to Nazism, death to fascism, death to neoliberal globalism. But to a country, I don't think that's productive whatsoever, especially when it was UN that allowed Israel to become a country. But what most people don't know, Ellie, is that there were all these preconditions, including right of return, that Israel has been violating. That was a precondition for this country to exist. But
right now they should just cancel UN and everything they've done.
Except we don't have anything to replace it. But yeah, UN needs to get reformed. Why should only 5 countries be part of the UN Security Council these 5 countries happen to be the top 5 exporter and manufacturers of all weapons and armaments and weapons of mass destruction. France, UK, to be part of the Security Council? These 2 countries have a history of 500 years of theft, rape, and murder in Africa. These 2 countries, and in the case of UK, all the way to China and India. China should be a part of the UN. They were a suppressed country. They were a peaceful country for centuries. They were abused by everybody. I can see China being there, but Russia, imperialist Russia, who used to be Soviet Union, why should they be part of the UN? Again, less history of bloodshed than the other 3, being UK, Britain, and Washington. So, I mean, why these countries get to be permanent and other countries get to come in and go rotate? The whole mechanism
to begin with
is artificial. And they came out, the Israelis came out. This is very interesting. I'll end it with this, unless I can go on further if you want. The Israelis came out and they're openly revealing the
hour 45 minutes.
Yeah, the Israelis came out and say all these institutions that we created are being used against us. I mean, what else do you have to say? The modern world is an invention by Zionists.
Right.
ICJ, ICC, UN, WHO, WTO, International Monetary Fund, IMF, which is a mafia organization. These were all put together, invented by the Rothschild syndicate and their financial arm and media arms. And by that, I am not invoking the Jews. Let that be clear. I love Jews, my two best friend Jews. I even gone to synagogues and prayed with them. So this is not against Judaism. This is against people who hate the Jews, who happen to be ethnically Jews, but they're anything but. The modern world was invented by the Zionists, but those institutions are being used against them. UN is being used against them. There's been no country other than Israel that there has been so many UN resolutions passed against. That is a good start, if you ask me. The decision by ICC to arrest the Hamas leaders as well as the Israeli war leaders, warmongers, to me was a great decision. It was balanced. Get the Hamas leadership. They're terrorists. And why was it 3 against 2? 3 Hamas leaders versus 2 Israeli leaders. That was a little skewed to me. They should have gone 3-3. Go after the war minister and Netanyahu and another creep. I forgot his name, the ultra-religious nut job, who's the Interior Secretary of Israel. I'm sorry we were just talking too much about Israel. The other topics, Iranian election. Do you still want to talk about it? I have time. I don't have lectures from Iran.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to go over 2 hours simply because of the technicality issues of downloading this video. It doesn't work. But I do want people to ask some question and then briefly please address the Iranian elections. What do you think is going to happen?
I think the Iranian elections, we should do another podcast on it. I have tremendous insight on that. Let's do another
on each one of your articles.
Yeah. We can do another podcast on the Iranian election and its interrelatedness with the nuclear issue, as well as its interrelatedness with Ukraine, Russia, China, and the future Trump administration, if that's what we're going to get, or the Biden administration. These things are completely interconnected. And in a few words, I can shed a lot of light, not oversimplify, but simplify. And for people to know how this one country, if you look at the map, if you look at the geography of Iran, I'll just try to make it very brief here. Literally, if you look at the geography of this country with 83 million people, if you look at it in the map, it's literally at the epicenter, geographically speaking, of 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa, what we call the Great World Island. This is a term that was coined by a very controversial Russian intellectual named Aleksander Azadgan. The Great World Island, Africa, Europe, and Asia. There's this whole new movement of calling it Eurasia now, right? Asia and Europe together. Literally one huge island that is completely interconnected. People say, what about the Africa part? Africa, the only distance between Africa and Asia is the Suez Canal, which you can easily actually swim across if you don't hit a cargo ship. So they're all interconnected. And Iran is literally at the epicenter of this. I mean, from geopolitically, geographically, it's just at the right place. That's why it has to be balkanized. They want to balkanize it. All anti-Iran activists, they call themselves anti-Islamic Republic. All anti-Iran activists are trying to essentially balkanize Iran into several countries. The map is already out there on the internet. It was concocted by this very creepy professor. He has croaked since then, named Bernard Lewis. He was an Islamologist and a Middle Eastern professor. I believe he was at the same university that Albert Einstein taught at, which is Princeton. He came up with the Bernard Lewis map of completely restructuring the map of the Middle East. And if you look at it, the country that gets most screwed by this new map is Iran. And so the balkanization of Iran is their ultimate goal of the Israelis. Turn it into several countries, Kurdistan, Khorasan, Baluchistan, take away anything that's strategic and give the little desert area in the middle and actually go back and calling that Persia, which is if you ask me, it sounds good, it sounds Western, but it's derogatory. The country is called Iran because it consists of all these different tribes, and Iranian tribes, Persians happen to be the majority, the alpha type of, ethnicity, but there's all these beautiful Iranian tribes under the umbrella of the country called Iran, and let's go back and balkanize it is the plan, and just go back and take this desert wasteland in the middle that has nothing and call that Persia. They want to turn the country of Khuzestan, call it Shiaistan. They're going to bring religious, sectarianism into it, and create a whole country called Kurdistan. Big disaster. I have sympathy for my Kurdish colleagues and friends, some of the most loving people, but that country should never be allowed to exist. Kurds had a very evil role in helping the Ottomans with the Armenian genocide. The Kurds themselves believe that they're a cursed people because of what they did to the Armenians. A million of them died, and all the other issues. But having said that, the Kurds are one of the most Iranic, this is very important, between Iranian and Iranic tribes out there, if you may. They're more Iranic than the Persians themselves because of their, genetic bloodline, just intermarrying and whatnot. So that's another discussion. The Iranian elections, you have to look at it in the context of movements. Are we going to have a conservative, anti-globalist movement? Are we going to have a neoliberal, global, globalist, reformist movement, whatever you want to call it? We have to look at it within those global contexts and the global movements that are taking place.
Have you watched the debates?
I have watched the debates here and there. My time is extremely limited. I have 15-hour work days. I watched the highlights of some of the debates. I saw the temper tantrum that one of the senior advisors of the chief reformist liberal candidate Pezeshkian. Yeah, there's a temper tantrum that was happening. Yeah. So no, not Zarif. Zarif is not running for president. The liberal candidate is this person who was the minister of health under Rouhani, called Pezeshkian, Mr. Pezeshkian. I don't know if he's a PhD. Dr.
He's
Pezeshkian.
with Andrew.
Yeah, one of his advisors threw a temper tantrum and actually threw the microphone. It was a fight between one of Pezeshkian's senior advisors and the other guy, the conservative guy, the advisor. People will know that. It's all over Instagram. My advice, my counsel to people is to not focus on those sensationalist things that are happening in these debates. Focus on the theme, focus on the theory, focus on the ideology, and focus on the movement. Look at the big holistic picture instead of these little things, because these are what anti-Iran Persian-speaking media are they just try to work a lot with the context, not the content, the context. And a lot of it is, emotionality, emotive sort of the attitudes. Don't get focused on that. It's entertaining, right? But focus on the actual movement. Raisi was a movement. He was part of a much bigger movement. It wasn't just a person. His foreign affairs minister was part of a sort of challenging the global order movement. And they were highly respected. In Iran, they're controversial and whatnot. I don't want to go into the domestic part of their politics, but you got to say something. Something needs to be said. That the UN would have their flag at half-staff when these two were killed in a helicopter crash. Something needs to be said that there was a 1 minute standing minute of silence when these two died. Something needs to be said when China comes and said Raisi was a friend of China. In the Mandarin translation of the word friend, it's a very emotional term. The Chinese don't use emotional terms. I'm not taking the side of Raisi. I'm just trying to say that this movement they were part of was something that was deeply respected by the non-alignment movement in the world, the global South, if you may. So they were being realistic. And I need to say this too. Raisi was negotiating behind the scene with the Americans, with the Biden administration. So the forces that don't want relations between US and Iran, which must take place at some point, killed him. It gets extremely complicated, and the treachery is unbelievable. Also, 17 Iranian banks vetoed Raisi's financial reform legislation. What does that say? Right? What does that say? Who runs the Iranian banks? It's mostly liberals, if you ask me. I was at the Central Financial District in Tehran. Never in my life have I seen more obvious Freemasonic symbology Then I saw in the heart of the Iranian capital, supposedly one of the countries that's standing up to the West. Their economy is completely taken over by globalist banksters. That's what reformers are all about. Don't look at these people with praise. No. They're, in my opinion, they are the fifth column in Iran. They're more dangerous than all these sort of so-called oppositions outside of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, the rest of those creeps. The Iranian liberals are more dangerous than them. And Pezeshkian is their candidate. But we can go into that tangent and have tremendous amount of information on what's really going on in Iran. I'm not taking sides, by the way. I'm an American citizen, and my interest is American national interest, and for policymakers in this country to make the right decisions, and that will culminate into peace and security. I'm interested in that. I counsel for the sake of peace. I don't take sides of foreign nations. My interest is primarily the formulation of correct U.S. foreign policy that will bring countries and people together instead of continuing war and lamentation and division and sectarianism. That needs to be said.
Okay, we have like 3 minutes left. If anybody wants to respond, talk to Dr. Azadgan, please do it now.
I'd just like to
He's
say one
also
thing about.
dying. We're getting forced out. Okay.
I'd just like to say one thing about what he said there about the H group in Gaza, calling them the T group. A lot of people that was fighting for their country has been called the T group. Even in our country, Michael Collins, Bobby Sands, all the likes of those people, now they're classified as heroes. Mr. H Group has done more for Palestine or for Gaza, well, yeah, Palestine, because he's got them talking in the United Nations more about recognizing Palestine as a state. So I wouldn't really call him the T Group more than anything. Now, I know he was set up as a militant at the start, and people have to recognize that too.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, these things are a two-edged knife, right? You could call for the existence of a nation state, Palestine, and that's always a good development. But if you use civilians as a shelter, or you murder civilians for political opportunities or political gain, we gotta invoke the T word. We gotta be balanced. By invoking the T word, we take away the power of the Zionists. Trust me, I've been on enough debates to wanting to brand me as pro-Hamas, which I never even was, but that's what they want to do to you. Then you have to take that ability away from them and call things for what they are. Just because you want to establish a state of Palestine doesn't make you legitimate, you know? Means and ways.
But when you say hiding behind people, Gaza is 25 miles by 5 miles in width.
Yes.
And you put 2.5 million people into a small place, you are going to have that problem. Like, I don't know this 100% true now, but in Tel Aviv, I was told the Israeli army base is inside the town. So who's hiding behind who?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be Israel or Hamas. It doesn't have to be either or. As fair-minded academics, we are equal opportunity critics. They're important.
Agreed.
You get a lot of legitimacy. I think we lost our connection, right?
Who did we lose?
I heard a beep. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Okay, Nuri Jun, do you want to have a last word? Irish Warrior, I agree with you. I feel for them, but his definition is academic. So,
I mean, we can talk paramilitary, military strategy. We can go into that, absolutely, and talk about those. We can talk about resistance, using the word resistance groups. We can go into all these, emotionally charged words. But my expertise and background is in diplomacy and academia, so we have to be very clear and concise with our words. and be very fair-minded. But on the ground, the reality on the ground warfare and shifting and shapings and military tactics are a whole lot more complicated than in the world of diplomacy and academia. That's why we call it the fog of war.
What?
War itself is the enemy, is what I want to say. As a peace activist, as an anti-war, war itself is the enemy. In a nuclear age, when certain heads of state, talk about invoking nuclear weapons, war itself in the 21st century is the enemy. And I think what's his name, the famous German military strategy during the times of Napoleon, would agree with that statement. His name doesn't come to my mind. He was a mercenary Prussian general for Germany. He was working for Napoleon and also for German states. His name doesn't.
Where do you publish your work? Do you have your blog, or is it just
no? Where I publish my work is being put under and no published, not being allowed to be published there list of the Treasury Department sanctions, and so I can't even publish my work. Where my work has gone published all these years, where I'm at complete editorial control of my work. Not a word is added or taken out. That's why I'm an editor at large. I write about whatever I want, whenever I want. But those sites are being branded as propaganda, even though I just say what I have to say, my own personal opinion. I don't pander to anybody, so I can't get published on those websites. That's it's not a gag order, but it's another infringement of our First Amendment rights here. I believe in when God closes one door, other doors open. So,
well, we're gonna have
you
here and talk about your articles and Irish Warrior. If you Google his name, two websites come up with many articles. One is, what is it called? Katayun? No.
Yeah, the first one is called Katahan. It's Kath. Yeah, if you just Google my name, that one will pop up. A lot of articles there in different languages. And then Geopolitica is another think tank. They're both think tanks.
They seem to be the same articles, right?
Sometimes they're the same articles, sometimes they're not. I have another article published on Imperia News. That's where I was an editor at large as well. Another one and another think tank called I forgot what it was called. I sent you the link yesterday, Ellie.
Yeah, I have it.
It's a Turkish think tank, and 5 very good pieces were published there. What is the name of that organization? Anyway, just Google me and my articles are pop up everywhere. They're reposted everywhere, and I hope you like it. Next time we'll do an interview on that.
Yeah.
Sure.
United World.
United World International Analytical Center, UWI. Yeah. Some good
My only
pieces got
question
published
or
there.
concern throughout this whole thing was that how Palestinian could be represented while they elected themselves Hamas as their representative, and Hamas was doing a lot for them. And if we really put down Hamas, then in a way that's what Zionists would like to.
We have to follow.
And how
we have to be careful not
differentiate ourselves from them.
We have to make sure we don't fall into that rabbit hole. Like I said, Hamas got democratically elected in an election that was internationally monitored. That was back in 2005. Things were very different. We had no social media back then. I mean, it's incredible how much things have changed. So there will be new movements emerging as a result of Hamas losing its clout because of their techniques that are unkosher, if I can use the word. There will be new movements that will emerge, and there will be rational and sane leaders that are more savvy, more in touch with how the world really works, instead of just in the echo chambers that they're in. And I see good things happening for Palestine. One of the reasons Hamas got elected was because they were not utterly corrupt like PLO is. They were actually honest. They focused on infrastructure, and the money that they were getting from Qatar was
Right.
being was being dispersed into making hospitals and schools and colleges even. In that
That's
sense, people
why
like Hamas, but then their
yeah.
methods and the
No, that's
accusations.
why I consider them the leader as long as Palestinians are. When and if Palestinian with freedom create their own leader other than Hamas, then I would accept it. At this
Yeah,
point, truly we all should, because especially Zionism is trying so hard. Yes, we understand that they tried to create Hamas Zionists against PLO at the time that was so powerful. But then when they were really representing Palestinians and helping, then Zionism is trying to condemn. And we ought to stand up against that as long as Palestinians are represented by Hamas
yeah. It's
until Palestinians come up with an alternative, if they come up.
I think they ultimately will.
Well, then
Language
I
is
would,
important. Media warfare is important. Psychological messaging is
but it
important.
is
The
important
brand,
at this
yes,
point, especially when Zionism is behaving the way they are doing and trying to
yeah,
eliminate Hamas and
yeah.
Palestinians.
I
It's
understand your
very
argument.
important that we stand
I
with.
totally understand your argument, but it's very controversial, and U.S. Treasury Department has branded Hamas as a FTO, foreign terrorist
Oh,
organization. So even saying what we're saying could get us in trouble because that would say supporting a terrorist organization, and that would fall
no,
under the
I
Patriot
I
Act.
don't go by
Yeah, but
U.S.
this is I
imperialists
know.
supported
I'm waiting
massacre
for
of children
lawyers.
in Palestine.
Nobody does.
That's
I am
so I
waiting for
am not.
lawyers to. I'm waiting for lawyers to band together so we could have freedom of thought. I mean, this is
Lawyer.
unbelievable.
No.
But I'm under different pressures than average citizen. So
Even
I'm
here,
more
we're supposed to
fair-minded.
say
I don't idealize Hamas. If they stand up to
I
Israelis
do.
and defend the Palestinian people, I have a different perspective on that. It doesn't have to be
As
either
long
or.
as Palestinians, yeah, they
Yeah, but Palestinians themselves in Gaza, if they say anything contrary to Hamas, they will get
well,
beheaded and killed. So I mean, the
well,
methods matter. We can be a Machiavellian here and say the means justify the ends. Of course we can.
well.
Machiavellian talk about that. He's the
No,
father of modern political science versus Aristotle, who was the
yeah,
original father
yeah. I
of
go
political
by
science.
Palestinian people at this
Yeah,
point.
I go with Palestinian people all the way. I just hope they would have a more savvy leadership to get things done.
Well,
Believe me, Netanyahu and the
they
Israelis are
do,
more
they do.
petrified than an army of lawyers in Brussels and Geneva and New
No,
York than a million Palestinian paramilitary
no.
organizations. Believe me.
This is imperialism and
Of
Zionist
course.
promotion
Yeah.
against Palestinians and against Hamas. And
Yeah. Yeah.
until this settles, and until Palestinians themselves, if they condemn Hamas, then I would. Otherwise, as long as Zionism is attacking like that against Palestinians and Palestinian leadership, I'm going to stand strongly with people of Palestine and their leadership until things become more clear. And
Yeah.
PLO is elected by U.S. imperialism to pretend that they are giving rights to Palestinian, which they
Yeah.
are not.
Under the UN Charter, you have any people have a right to protect themselves against the occupying force. The UN Charter is not ambiguous whatsoever. And these are occupying forces, not just in Gaza, but
Right.
also in West Bank, and some say the entire thing. I don't believe in the entire thing. It's not practical anymore. But definitely, the illegal settlements in West Bank is 100% against international law. 100%. And they've gone and they captured the most, land that you can irrigate, and at the top of the hills, that's where they build their so-called settlement. I mean, the word settlement itself is a euphemism. It's
Yeah.
occupation. And so that will all have to be unassembled when real Palestine gets created,
Or
which I,
real Palestine, fortunately, the whole globe is becoming real Palestine because Palestinians are for resistance and for justice and for humanity and love. And I get that as the ultimate um, being right politically, being right humanly, and I am with that until if they come with anything else, because now the whole ideology of resistance and love, really, Palestinians globally are symbolic of resistance as much as they are symbolic for peace. And there is no other movement for more than 100 years resisting imperialism and Zionism in the world the way Palestinians have done it. And they are teaching all of us in the world how to be human, how to resist, how to care for peace, and all of that. What you hear from Palestinians, they say, we want to go back home. That's all they say, with all the massacres of children and Palestinian people that is being done. They say, we just want to go back home. And this shows the dignity, this shows the resistance, more than 100 years, and the whole world needs to learn from that, the whole world.
Yeah, and you know, in a way, the Palestinian cause is liberating us in America.
That's right.
From the powers that be and from the corrosive powers of lobbies. In a way, these people, close to 38,000 of them have been killed. That was the price, tragic price of people waking up. Not people like you and me. We've been awake for 50 years, 40 years. Regular average people, through the barbaric acts of Israelis against civilians, are a certain part of them, the human part of them that's still alive, hopefully, is getting triggered to wake up and realize that our country is completely taken hostage by Zionist lobbies. AIPAC is just one of them. There's the Zionist Organization of America. There's there's so many of them. Anti-Defamation League, which is supposed to be anti-defamation, but it's really a pro-Israel lobby, ADL. There's so many of them. Even the Center for Southern, I don't know what it's called. A lot of them have been totally hijacked, and so you can't even criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite and whatnot. So, yeah, it's geopolitics. It's a very complicated and murky road. Academia, we have our ideals and whatnot, but on the ground politics, on the ground tactics and strategies, very murky. Talk to anybody who's serving the military, and they'll tell you. Right and wrong really gets convoluted sometimes, and it's hard to tell which is what. But when you murder 38,000 people and are still so narcissistic to call yourself the most moral army on earth, you have lost your credibility a long time ago, and the world knows it. And even the majority of Israelis know it. It's just that they're caught up in this crazy cycle where fear is being really used effectively against them, the Israelis.
Israel, the way it is, got to go. Israel, the way it is, got to go. We must work together. Israel got to be destroyed the way it is.
I don't have as a public figure, I don't have the luxury of what private citizens can say about Israel. Zionism has got to go. It's the problem with the ideology.
Got to go. Israel is Zionist state. It's not even a state. It was, I have a book, and really I highly recommend, Against Our Better Judgment, shows that how Israel was created.
Absolutely.
It is not a real, genuine state for so many centuries or years being somewhere. All the Jews had their own homeland.
Yes.
They were different places. They were in Iran. Iran has about 1 million Jews, and those Jewish people, they want to remain Iranian, and they are, and they are respected.
It's like what President Biden said. He said
Yeah,
his famous
religion.
line that he stands by, that
Yeah,
if there was no
President
Israel, we
Biden.
would have created one.
President Biden is Zionist himself.
He's a vile Zionist, but his